is using AI responsibly in research, right? So, as Deepak already mentioned, it is a topic that is very relevant these days, especially when there are so many AI tools in the boundary between what is ethical and what is not ethical. It is not very clear, it is somewhat blurred, especially for young researchers. It is even more confusing as to what we can do and what we cannot do. For example, can we copy and paste text from ChatGPT into a research paper? Can we make diagrams with an AI tool, put it in our research paper? Can we upload our research paper to a third party site where from we can seek feedback on our paper? All of these questions, they hopefully will be answered in today's webinar. More specifically, we'll start with a brief introduction to contextualize the rest of our discussion as to um, sort of set a common ground that, okay, what we are going to talk about, which AI tools are used, why we use those tools. Then the third point would be what are the different ethical risks in using AI tools. And fourthly, which is more important, is that what kind of principles you need to follow when you're using AI tools so that you don't end up being in troubled waters for academic integrity, violation of certain rules, and so on and so forth. The fifth part would be that, okay, then what do universities says, like, to the students, that can is it allowed to use AI tools? Is it not allowed to use AI tools? Similarly, the journals to which we publish papers, what are their guidelines? Like, are they allowing it? Are they not allowing it? These sorts of things we'll look at. And lastly, we'll end up with a few key messages that, okay, for example, if we do not understand anything out of this whole webinar, we do not get anything from this whole presentation, at least these two, 3 points you can take away with yourself, and hopefully that would help you in your research journey. So, starting with the first point, that why this webinar even matters, like why we are here, why we are doing it. So, as I mentioned at the first point, is that there is a very significant increase in the use of AI tools. If you happen to follow me on LinkedIn or on X, or you follow my website, you would see me every now and then sharing about AI tools. That, okay, for example, we can use this AI tool for literature review, we can use this one for refining our paper, we can use this tool to analyze data for us. So, why am I saying all of this thing on social media? It's not that like I like these tools or I'm personally invested in these tools. That could be one reason, but more so because there are more and more AI tools being built. And when they surface, I personally have a look at them. And when I see something good in them, then I share those things online as well. Now, speaking beyond the academic and research world, AI is becoming a part of our daily life flow. So, for instance, you would see people having ChatGPT on their phones. They talk to ChatGPT. People having these, like for example, taking notes. It has become very much automated. I've seen in many meetings that people, like, right after the meeting, they would send you a whole thing about the meeting minutes, that, okay, this is what has been discussed. So it is all AI that is playing its role. The next point is about the, as I mentioned, that because the use of AI tools, it is becoming very pervasive. Now, when such a thing happens, it becomes important as to determine the boundary, that what we can do, what we cannot, where we can use AI tool, where we cannot use AI tool, where we should declare the use of AI tools, where we are okay not declaring it even. The next point is about the responsible use. So, linking it to the second point, that, okay, for example, someone like me who test these AI tools, who know how to use these tools, is it okay for me to use them every now and then everywhere? Of course, they're gonna be like, kind of, from the time perspective, it would get me less time to do a certain task, but is it ethical or is it not ethical? Is it gonna hit my creativity at some point or not? These sorts of things are very much unclear to the large majority of research community. So this talk or this presentation, it is important and it matters to clarify all these points. So as I mentioned that if you look at this figure, so on one side you see responsible AI use, on another side you see irresponsible AI use, and then there is this boundary, right? So in today's webinar, we are going to look at where is this boundary, what lies on the left side of this boundary, and what lies on the right side of this boundary. In other words, what I can do with AI tools and what I cannot do with AI tools. Can I write my literature review using an AI tool? Can I draw a diagram using AI tool? Can I analyze data using AI tools? Can I create more data using AI tools? These sorts of questions we will try to answer. So by the end of the webinar, you would understand the capabilities of AI tools. That, okay, for example, what sort of things we can do with AI tools. For this one, obviously, in our previous webinars, we covered this part more. So if you follow me on social media, I keep on sharing when I see a good use case. As I mentioned, that okay, for example, there is a tool that has been launched and it can help in a certain way. So I do share in those sort of things. I Generally, my stance is that I'm all for AI tools, but for more so the responsible use of AI tools. The second thing is that at the end of this webinar, you will understand the ethical risks, that where it can put you in trouble if you do not use it in the right way as a researcher. Like, for example, if you have written your paper and it is all AI written, like you ask ChatGPT to write your abstract, you ask ChatGPT to write your introduction, and so on and so forth, and then you submit it to a journal, right? So what is going to happen? Do you expect that it would be published, or it can put you in some kind of trouble, right? So we'll try to understand those risks when we are doing unethical use of AI tools. The next one is about learning responsible practices and knowing institutional guidelines as to what the institutions say about the use of these AI tools. Now, the first question is that where we can use AI tools. Now, this part we have covered in previous webinars, so I'll not go into the depth of these things. But generally speaking, the whole journey of research, from the exploration, idea generation to review and refinement, we can use AI tools, right? So, for example, there are tools which can help you in the identifying a research gap, right? Like, for example, you can say that, okay, I work in the field of economy and um, maybe environment. So, can you tell me what sort of questions have been not answered so far? And the tool says to you that, okay, you can have a look at the question that what is the impact of climate change on microeconomics, right? So it gives you some food for thought, and then obviously you need to go further down to see that whether it is a concrete gap or it is not a gap. Then the second point is about the literature review. So let's suppose um, you want to do literature review for any purpose. There are multiple purposes of doing a literature review. It could be part of your PhD, it could be part of your master's thesis, it could be that you want to understand a field of study, it could be that you want to understand some patterns in a field of study. It could be that you want to as an industry guy, you want to do a literature review, or you want to identify gaps in a field of study and you do a literature review. Sorry. The next one is about data collection. Now, for example, if you are someone in the machine learning or deep learning field, identifying the right data sets, it's sometimes very challenging, especially when your research questions are such that when your research questions are such that those are very new and there does not exist any data set. So people do use AI tools to generate synthetic data. Can we do that or can we not do that? Right? That's the main question here. Then for analysis of data, there are many tools that you can use where you can upload your data, like for example, your quantitative data, your qualitative data. You can upload your interview transcripts, give it the research question, the tool would analyze the data for you and give you findings. Similarly, for writing a research paper, we can use AI tools and lastly, for review and refinement, which means that you can use AI tools to remove grammatical errors, typos, fix formatting issues. And then even there are tools to which you upload your paper, and they will give you a peer review that, okay, for example, what is good in your paper, what is not good in your paper, and then you work on them and further improve your paper before you send it to a journal. So the point here is that from exploration in idea generation until the last point of refinement, throughout these phases, we have AI tools that can help us. Now, for example, if you look at this one tool, SciSpace, and if you go to their homepage, so this is what it looks like, right? And if you see that they offer a lot of things to you, like you can review literature, you can write a draft, you can create a diagram, you can search papers, extract data from papers, review my writing, write a report, analyze data, and so on and so forth, right? So if you see that, the things that we discussed in the previous slide, almost all of them can be covered with this one tool. And similarly, there are many other tools. This is one of the tools. There are many other tools that can help you to accomplish, or in other words, to facilitate you in the process of doing good research. And I'm quite sure that most of you, as was the question also asked at the start, most of you would have used one or more tools in some way during your research journey. Okay. Now, in the previous slide, we looked at that, okay, where we can use AI tools in research. Now, this one is more about why we use AI tools, right? What is the benefit of using these AI tools? Now, if we look at the first thing is speed. Like, for example, if you are analyzing data and let's suppose you have qualitative data and you use in vivo, or you use manually, you analyze data using thematic analysis, it's going to take a lot of time, right? But if you do it through a tool, then that would certainly, like, what might take you a week can be done in a couple of hours. The second thing is productivity. So a lot of repetitive tasks, it can be done rather quickly through the use of AI tools. So for example, if I have to identify papers for my literature review, now, especially if you're doing a systematic literature review, the process of identifying papers, it's very rigorous and very comprehensive process. You have to design a search string, you need to define inclusion and exclusion criteria, you have to do a pilot study, then do title based selection, abstract based selection, then full text selection, and so on and so forth. Now, in my case personally, when I was doing my first systematic literature review during my PhD, it took me almost 1 week to identify papers, because the search string that I designed, when I executed it on the search engine, it returned around 5,000 research papers. So then those 5,000, I have to bring it down to it eventually got down to around 74 papers. But that whole journey, it took around a week of time. Now with AI tools, you can do the same thing almost in an hour or two. Give it the search string, specify the filter, input the filters, and so on and so forth, and you get the almost the same set of papers. Rather, instead of week, you can get it in a couple of hours. Then the next point is about the accessibility, that almost everyone has access to it. It's online, so it's pretty much kind of at the access of everybody. Then there are no language barriers. Like, for example, I've seen that tools are available in multiple languages, so anyone from anywhere can use them. And lastly, about the idea. So, for example, if you use, uh, let's suppose ChatGPT, and you ask it for to give you some research case in a particular area, it has access to a lot of data. So, based on that, it can give you some initial food for thought as a starting point, where then you need to go more further, or at least on the surface, it can give you something to start with. So, this is why we use AI tools. Save our time, be more productive. Okay. Now, the next point is that we use AI tools. It's good. There are benefits to it, but there is certain reality as well. And the reality is that AI, it is not a researcher. AI may not always be accurate, and we cannot hold AI accountable, right? Something goes wrong, a person need to be responsible, not a machine or an algorithm, right? So this is something that we need to keep in mind when we are using AI tools, right? So if something goes wrong, it would be you as a researcher who need to take the responsibility, not that saying that, okay, for example, this is was the output I got from an AI tool. Now, the next question is that why does it even matter? Why we should be so concerned about the responsible use of AI, right? Now, as an academic, as a researcher, there are certain consequences to our actions. Like, for example, um, during my PhD, the first paper that I wrote, we sent it to a very decent journal, and the journal disc rejected the paper. So what happened was that right after the rejection, my PhD supervisor asked me for a meeting, and as expected, he asked me, "Okay, what happened?" And the reason they rejected the paper was that there was paper was around 40 pages paper, and there was one line that was taken verbatim from a particular source without referring to it. And I told this to my supervisor that there was just one sentence, and he said to me that it doesn't matter whether it's one sentence or there is one page. The paper got rejected. And he told me that you are a student, you just started your PhD, so your reputation is like, uh, is important, but you are still very early in your career. For me, I'm a seasoned researcher, and this is something that is going to tarnish my whole reputation. So he said that this is not acceptable. And after that, certainly, it didn't happen. But that was what I'm saying is that there are consequences when things like that happen. When we put plagiarized content, when we put things where we do not refer to the original source, partially in something which is going to be peer reviewed, then there are certain consequences. So, research integrity, important, academic credibility, very important, reproducibility. So, for example, um, you have asked AI to maybe, you uploaded your data and you ask it to analyze the data for you. You got some findings, you put it in the paper. Now, the problem is that for another researcher, replicating those findings would be difficult because you have given a certain prompt to the AI. Unless the other person know the same prompt, it is difficult to generate the same kind of findings from that data. So that's why it matters that the the right use or the responsible use of AI, it matters. Okay, now the what are the risks here, right? So the risks, the first one is the spread of false information. So, for example, you're putting something which is generated by AI, it might be hallucinated, it is getting published everywhere, for example. So that's, in a way, we are not contributing to the field. We are rather damaging the body of knowledge, right? The second one is the bias or discrimination. So this is one other issue with the AI tools. So, for example, if I ask AI tool to tell me that um, what is the most for example, the best drink in the world, right? And it says that coffee is the best drink. Now, coffee might be the most popular drink, let's suppose, in US, and the tool is trained on data from US. The answer is correct in the context of US, but the answer is one might not be correct, let's suppose, in some other part of the world. Let's suppose in India, maybe tea is more popular drink, not coffee. So that bias based on the training data, it is there, and we need to be mindful of it. The next one is the privacy violations. So, for example, if I have uploaded my data, now who can see my data, who has access to my data, those sort of things need to be clarified, because not AI tools might be following the same rules and regulations. The next one is the responsibility and accountability. So, this is what I mentioned, that what happens is that when you put something that is generated by AI, um, you are responsible, not AI is responsible. And I'll give you an example of an incident that happened to me a couple of days ago, where I myself fell victim, not victim, but I was guilty of doing something similar. And the next one is the data security. So, for example, if you have some very sensitive data, right? Let's suppose you have customer data for your business and you upload it to a third party server. Now, if there is a breach that happened, your data gets stolen, you're in big trouble, right? So that is something, again, we need to be very careful about. Transparency, that's another problem, that sometimes we do not know, everything is not very clear how our data is being handled, how output is produced based on the existing data. So there is it's more, AI is more like a black box to us. So the first thing, big risk that I believe that you might have also come across. This is what I'll give you an example of what happened to me. So initially, when ChatGPT was launched, I was using it for identifying some papers, and at that time I was doing some study. It was during my postdoc, I believe. And what happened was that I give it, like, okay, for example, identify papers for me that are related to, let's suppose, the security of big data systems. And it gave me papers, and I was like, wow, how is it possible that such kind of very similar papers exist and I'm not aware of it? Like, how I'm doing research in this field of study for the last 2 years. These papers are very much close to what I'm doing, and I'm not aware of it. And then I, by chance, took one of the paper and I put it on Google Scholar to download it, but there was no such paper. Then I tried another one. Again, there was no such paper. So it has hallucinated those references. It faked those references. Certainly, in the last couple of years, things have improved, but still, you need to keep an eye on what it produces. It can even produce incorrect facts, as I gave you an example, because of the bias of data, the and also depending upon how good or bad a prompt you write, it might mislead you. And this last thing is that the tool in itself is very confident in its answers, and majority of people also just take it the way the tool gives an answer. So this is the first risk, and something that you need to be aware of. Okay, the second one, which is very common for research, is the plagiarism concern. So, for example, if I have written my introduction section or my abstract of my paper using ChatGPT, I put it in the paper and it gets as plagiarized content, right? So, what would I do, right? There we get in trouble. This is another risk that we have at hand. when we are using AI tools. The next one is the privacy of data. As I earlier mentioned, that when we upload our data, we are not exactly sure that who has access to the data, what they can see and what they cannot see in the data, whether it is encrypted or it is not encrypted. Bias, as I mentioned, that there are tools that you can train on develop your own small chat GPTs based on your own data, right? Now, if I have developed, let's suppose, an LLM for my course, let's suppose I'm teaching a deep learning course, then I have some content, I uploaded the content and it knows my course material. Somebody else asks a question, it would not know the context and it might give an incorrect answer. The fifth one, which is again very important, that is over dependence on these tools. So when you are doing things yourself as a researcher, doing everything yourself, like for example, um, considering my example of doing a systematic literature review, it took me around 6 months of time to do my first literature review because I did everything myself. Searching papers, extracting data from the papers, analyzing data, looking at the patterns, writing, refining everything, right? So it took time, but at the same time, it taught me and I learned that how to do a literature review. Now, on the other hand, if a student goes and asks, for example, a tool to write a systematic literature review on a blah 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 topic, the student might get a draft, but essentially the student did not learn anything, right? So when we are dependent on these things and we are using it to that level, over there we are, first, the output would not be as good as you would have prepared a draft, right? That's for sure. The second thing is that in that whole thing, you're missing the point, which is learning. You're not learning anything, you're not becoming a researcher. Like, for example, if you're a PhD student and you put everything on the shoulders of these AI tools, then okay, how are you going to become a researcher? Right? The whole job of a PhD, for example, is to make an independent researcher out of you. Now, if everything is done by tools, you have not learned anything, and then in that case, you essentially are not, the PhD should not be awarded to you rather to the AI tools, right? So this kind of dependence, it also makes us at times a bit lazy, and it kills our critical thinking ability, which is very important for researchers to think critically, meaning that okay, for example, some you see a piece of research and you have the ability to reflect on it, that what is good in it, what is not good in it, how the weaknesses can be improved. So those kind of that ability, that reflectability, it comes with time when you keep on reflecting, keep on looking at things from that particular angle. Now, if you're using all the way, everything is done by AI tools, you essentially not are not developing that critical eye. Okay, so we talked about the different kind of risks that are associated when we are using AI tools, right? Now, the next part is that we will look at the responsible use of AI, that what we can do as a researcher when we are using AI tools. As I mentioned earlier, that I'm not saying that we should completely be not using AI tools. At the same time, I'm not saying that we should be using AI tools for everything, right? So there should be a boundary where there is a good balance and then there is a responsible use of AI tools. And this is what we are going to talk about in the next section, that okay, we are going to use AI tools. However, we will do these things when using AI tools. The first one is the transparency. So we need to disclose the use of AI tools where it makes sense. So, for example, let's suppose I have written a paper and I want to submit it to Elsevier, okay, one of the journals of Elsevier. So nowadays, like I was yesterday, I was submitting one of the papers. So it was a revision of a paper to a journal called Computers and Security. Now it's an Elsevier journal. When I was submitting the paper, at the very end of the process in the portal, there was a pop up, and they say that did you use AI tools for any aspect of this work? Okay. Now over there, you should disclose if you have used AI tools. For example, you used AI tools to draw diagrams. So just you need to mention over there, then you say click and say, okay, I have used let's suppose this particular tool for drawing diagrams. Okay. Then as you see that, like I have shared some guideline from Elsevier that what do they expect from you when you have used AI tools, right? Similarly, for other journals like IEEE, ACM, Wiley, they have their own set of rules. So when you are submitting a paper, it is very important that you have a quick look at their AI policy. That what do they expect from you if you have used any AI in preparing a manuscript. Okay, now this is something that you can follow if you are, for example, for some journals, they already have this thing that, when you are submitting, they would ask you, have you used, and so on and so forth. So the template is very clear. For general purposes, let's suppose you are submitting maybe a research proposal for something, right? And they do not have an explicit template or question for whether you have used your any AI tool or not. So you can just simply put this template, which is the AI tool disclosure statement. You can say that which tools you have used, for what purpose you have used, and mention that you have cross-checked everything and you are responsible. So, for example, here, like you see that the person is saying that use ChatGPT and SciSpace, what for it was used for use for language refinement, literature search assistant, and so on. And the authors take responsibility for the accuracy, integrity, and ethical compliance, and that the data has not been uploaded to any external AI systems. So it just gives you a complete, safety guard that okay, AI tools have been used, but here is where I am disclosing it in the best possible words. That's the first thing. The second thing is that human is responsible. We are using AI tools, but we cannot hold them responsible, right? If something goes wrong, like for example, if your manuscript is all AI plagiarized, you cannot respond to the editor and say that AI has generated this. You should be responsible, right? So this is what we need to clarify. Or in other words, because when we are doing research at this time, it's also we cannot say that I didn't know, or I don't know, or it was not, I was not aware of it. So those kind of things, like as I mentioned, that it's better to, if you are confused, not clear, look at the policy of the journal or look at the policy of your institution. Those things have been most likely clarified by them. The third principle for the responsible use of AI is the verification. That when you get an output from an AI tool, it's always good to verify. Do a double check. Does it make sense? Does it not make sense? So, for example, there is this reference checker, right? Like multiple tools they offer these days, the reference checker. So, when you upload the reference to them, it tells you that whether, for example, there are any fake references or not. Like you can see in the screen that around 10 references are just fake, they do not exist, but they have been generated by some Gen AI tool and they came became part of the reference list. So it's always good to cross check the output of any AI tool. Okay. Now this is an example of what happened to me a couple of days ago, right? And what happened was that I put a post on social media and I say that okay, like there are these four professors, there like for example rules, regulations, and so on. So in based on this, which one we should choose? Okay. Now I was more focused on the profiles of these professors, like what their expectations are, expects to publish how many papers, offers funding for how much time, and so on and so forth. I completely overlooked their avatars, that what these professors look like, right? And when I put this post out, so there was a lot of criticism on the avatars. that why these professors look like this, why not they're like, for example, this is only they're only from the gender perspective there is no diversity, right? And when I looked at and I was like, wow, yeah, that seems to be the case, right? Now I mentioned that these avatars are generated by AI tool, and I got the response that okay, so what? You put it out, you are responsible, and that seemed to make sense, right? Like for example, if I'm putting something out on my social media or I'm writing something in my papers, so I'm responsible, right? I cannot say that it is done by AI. So it is just an example to clarify to you that it's always good to double check. In this case, I failed to double check, and then there was this um, criticism over the post, and rightly so. Okay, the next part is about the originality of thinking. So generally, my suggestion is to use AI when there is like some repetitive task. Do not use it when there is a task that requires critical thinking, that requires you to think deeply, go down, l- because that process in itself, that's a learning process. So, for example, if I have to um, search for papers, let's suppose, right, for my literature review, it's a task where you have to, read the abstract of, sorry, the titles of many papers and abstract and so on and so forth of irrelevant papers, majority of them. So, in that case, it's best to use an AI tool to give you the right set of papers. Okay, so instead of spending a week, you can do the same task in around 2 3 hours, and then the rest of the 5 or 6 days you can spend on reading the only relevant papers given to you by the AI tool. Now, for tasks where, uh, for example, I have to analyze data to look to identify patterns in it, right? Like using maybe thematic analysis or grounded theory. Now, that task is important, as in, like, for you as a researcher to read that extracted data and identify patterns that, okay, which sort of patterns are evolving in this particular field of study. Now, not saying that AI cannot do it, but when you do it, you are creating more findings. You are, connecting the dots. So it is important for you to do it yourself, right? You would lead to better findings and you would also learn in that whole process. Then the fifth principle is the protection of data. So, for example, when you are uploading something, you need to be very careful. Sometimes tools, they have their very clear cut data protection policies. Like for example, you can see one of SciSpace on your screen, that how they handle their data. So if there is a certain level of trust, a certain level of surety, they follow, let's suppose, a specific framework that, okay, we follow this framework of the government, and then you could be more sure. But especially when you have very sensitive data, for example, as I mentioned, like customers personal data, it would be not a good idea to blindly upload it to any third party website. The sixth point is about checking the plagiarism. I already give you my own example that it happened to me. In here, the point is not only about plagiarism but AI plagiarism. So sometimes, it's always good to check your paper before submitting it to a journal, right, and see that whether there is any AI detected AI written text or not. Now, this is something, a challenge, that these AI detectors, sometimes they even text that you have written yourself, it is detected as AI written, right? That is a challenge over there. But if, for example, the detector is saying that it's 100% or 90% AI written, then it is very likely that there is some issue in the manuscript. Okay, now the next part is about that what universities say. Like, can you use these tools or can you not use these tools? Universities generally, they are supportive of the use of AI tools, to sort of, because we cannot rule out the fact that AI has become part of our life and we cannot be blinded towards it, right? Uh, However, when we are doing that, though we should do in a responsible way. And like I've given just one example on the screen, but over generally, when you go to the website of any university, their AI policies are almost written on the website, that what they allow and what they do not allow. As far as the journals are concerned, so I mentioned it already that when you are submitting a research paper, have a look at their AI policy. Almost all good journals, they have their AI policies available on their websites. So, for example, for Wiley, you can see that they might say that you can indicate it in the acknowledgement section. You can mention it in the methods. For example, if you have used AI to analyze data or you have used AI to collect data, you should mention it in the methods section. Similarly, for figures, if you have used AI to draw a figure, just mention in the caption of the figure that it has been created through the use of this particular AI tool. Okay, now coming to the end in looking at that what we can do with AI tools and what we cannot do with AI tools. So the first thing is the disclosure, that if you're using it, it is much better to mention it that you have used AI, right? Like for example, for me, I looking at this figure, I used AI to create this tool, this to create this figure, and it's okay. It's just a presentation. I've drawn this figure to make my point. Fact checking the output that given by AI, always cross check it whether it's correct or not. Original analysis. That is what the point we mentioned, that you as a human need to put in your own energy into it to create some original findings rather than putting everything on the shoulder of AI. And what is unethical? Unethical is that when you fabricate data, for example, if you have a data set of, let's suppose, 1000 data points, right? And it's a small data set, and you give it to ChatGPT and say, okay, make it a data set of 2000 points, right? So the next 1000 points, those would be fabricated. Plagiarism, you cannot, for example, take a copy and paste text from a tool and put it in your paper. It would be most likely flagged as AI plagiarism. And privacy violations, you need to be aware that if you have very sensitive data, and you should not upload it. And even if upload, first have a look at the data safety policies of the tool to which you are uploading your data. To conclude, um, the first point is that AI tools, these tools assist you. They're not a replacement of a human. When it comes to more creative and top quality work, AI is not gonna be of a lot of help. The second thing is that, as you have seen, that we can use AI in quite a lot, almost every phase of our research journey: exploration, ideas, literature review, data analysis, data collection, writing papers, refining papers. Almost everywhere there are tools that we can use, but we need to be careful to make sure that we use it in a responsible way. And I believe that when you're using AI tools, your purpose should be to produce better research, right? Not that we are using it, and our motivation is that we are lazy and that's why we are using AI tools, right? It should be to improve the output rather than to not put our own effort. And as I mentioned, that when we are not making a responsible use of AI, it would have some consequences. Okay. When such a thing happen, we cannot say that I don't know, I didn't know, right? As I mentioned, that it's much better to look at the rules and regulations or AI policy of the university, AI policy of the journal. That would help you understand what is allowed and what is not allowed as far as AI tools use is concerned. And lastly, the policies are available. You can check them out. I did not go into the specific policies of every university or every journal because they are sometimes not totally aligned with each other. So whichever university, whichever journal, whichever platform, forum you are related with, you can certainly look at their policies to get things more clear for yourself as to what we can do and what we cannot do with AI tools in research sector.